departure of the French troops had left Cesare with only a small force. In fact, according to Machiavelli, Borgia had left Cesena with 10,000 infantrymen and 3,000 horse, taking pains to split up his men so that they would march along parallel routes before converging on Sinigalia. The reason for such a large force was that he knew from a confession extracted from Ramiro de Lorca what the condottieri had up their sleeve. He therefore decided to turn their own trap against them. This was the masterpiece of trickery that the historian Paolo Giovio later called the Magnificent Deceit. At dawn on December 31st, 1502, Cesare reached the outskirts of Sinigalia. Led by Micheletto Corella, Cesare's advance guard of 200 lances took up its position on the canal bridge. This control of the bridge effectively prevented the conspirators' troops from withdrawing. Cesare greeted the condottieri effusively and invited them to join him. Micheletto had prepared the Palazzo Bernardino for Cesare's use, and the Duke invited the condottieri inside. Once indoors, the men were quietly arrested by guards who crept up from the rear. Cesare gave orders for an attack on Vitelli's and Orsini's soldiers in the outlying areas. That night, while their troops were being crushed, Micheletto throttled Oliveretto and Vitelli in the Bernardino Palace. At one fell swoop, Borgia had got rid of his former generals and worst enemies. And from Napoleon Bonaparte, to have ultimate victory, you must be ruthless. Withdrawal from it will make you more talked about, even more admired. You must learn when to leave. Create value through scarcity. Transgression and observance of the law. Sir Guillaume de Ballon was a troubadour who roamed the south of France in the Middle Ages, going from castle to castle, reciting poetry, and playing the perfect knight. At the castle of Javiac, he met and fell in love with the beautiful lady of the house, Madame Guillaume de Javiac. He sang her his songs, recited his poetry, played chess with her, and little by little she in turn fell in love with him. Guillaume had a friend, Sir Pierre de Barjac, who traveled with him, and who was also received at the castle. And Pierre too fell in love with a lady in Javiac, the gracious but temperamental Viernetta. One day Pierre and Viernetta had a violent quarrel. The lady dismissed him, and he sought out his friend Guillaume to help heal the breach and get him back in her good graces. Guillaume was about to leave the castle for a while, but on his return, several weeks later, he worked his magic, and Pierre and the lady were reconciled. Pierre felt that his love had increased tenfold, that there was no stronger love, in fact, than the love that follows reconciliation. The stronger and longer the disagreement, he told Guillaume, the sweeter the feeling that comes with peace and rapprochement. As a troubadour, Sir Guillaume prided himself on experiencing all the joys and sorrows of love. On hearing his friends talk, he too wanted to know the bliss of reconciliation after a quarrel. He therefore feigned great anger with Lady Guillaume, stopped sending her love letters, and abruptly left the castle and stayed away, even during the festivals and hunts. This drove the young lady wild. Guillaume sent messengers to Guillaume to find out what had happened, but he turned the messengers away. He thought all this would make her angry, forcing him to plead for reconciliation as Pierre had. Instead, however, his absence had the opposite effect. It made Guillaume love him all the more. Now the lady pursued her knight, sending messengers and love notes of her own. This was almost unheard of. A lady never pursued her troubadour. And Guillaume didn't like it.
Wow.
Guillaume's forwardness made him feel she had lost some of her dignity. Not only was he no longer sure of his plan, he was no longer sure of his lady. Finally, after several months of not hearing from Guillaume, Guillaume gave up. She sent him no more messengers, and he began to wonder. Perhaps she was angry. Perhaps the plan had worked after all. So much the better if she was. He would wait no more. It was time to reconcile. So he put on his best robe, decked the horse in its fanciest caparison, chose a magnificent helmet, and rode off to Javiac. On hearing that her beloved had returned, Guillaume rushed to see him, knelt before him, dropped her veil to kiss him, and begged forgiveness for whatever slight had caused his anger. Imagine his confusion and despair. His plan had failed abysmally. She was not angry. She had never been angry. She was only deeper in love, and he would never experience the joy of reconciliation after a quarrel. Seeing her now, and still desperate to taste that joy, he decided to try one more time. He drove her away with harsh words and threatening gestures. She left, this time vowing never to see him again. The next morning, the troubadour regretted what he had done. He rode back to Javiac, but the lady would not receive him, and ordered her servants to chase him away across the drawbridge and over the hill. Guillaume fled. Back in his chamber, he collapsed and started to cry. He had made a terrible mistake. Over the next year, unable to see his lady, he experienced the terrible absence that can only inflame love. He wrote one of his most beautiful poems. My song ascends for mercy praying. And he sent many letters to Guillaume, explaining what he had done and begging forgiveness. After a great deal of this, Lady Guillaume, remembering his beautiful songs, his handsome figure, and his skills in dancing and falconry, found herself yearning to have him back. As penance for his cruelty, she ordered him to remove the nail from the little finger of his right hand and to send it to her, along with a poem describing his miseries. He did as she asked. Finally, Guillaume de Ballon was able to taste the ultimate sensation. A reconciliation even surpassing that of his friend Pierre. Interpretation. Trying to discover the joys of reconciliation, Guillaume de Ballon inadvertently experienced the truth of the law of absence and presence. At the start of an affair, you need to heighten your presence in the eyes of the other. If you absent yourself too early, you may be forgotten. But once your lover's emotions are engaged and the feeling of love has crystallized, absence inflames and excites. Giving no reason for your absence excites even more. The other person assumes he or she is at fault. While you are away, the lover's imagination takes flight, and a stimulated imagination cannot help but make love grow stronger. Conversely, the more Guillaume pursued Guillaume, the less he loved her. She had become too present, too accessible, leaving no room for his imagination and fancy, so that his feelings were suffocating. When she finally stopped sending messengers, he was able to breathe again and to return to his plan. What withdraws